Hey everyone, welcome back to Engelbard. Here's my review of E3 2021. Meh. Oh, you want me to elaborate? Let's do this! So E3 has this mystical reputation of being an incredible event, sort of like Christmas for gaming news, that happens at the end of spring or early summer, in which all the biggest hardware reveals happen, all the biggest new games are revealed, and everything amazing that's going to happen in gaming from then until the end of the year is going to just blow us all away. What? And sometimes you get a little bit of that, particularly when there are new game consoles around and we're seeing new games for the first time. But for the most part, E3 is really kind of a pretty tame event, at least in the last 20 or so years. Very often, a lot of the biggest games that are revealed at E3 don't even come out until 2, 3, 4, or more years later after their initial E3 reveal.
But some games are dropped the very same day that the company reveals them.
Yeah, you occasionally get some of that, but allow me to present some evidence. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild was announced in 2013. It came out in 2016. Metroid Prime 4 was announced in 2017. Here we are after E3 2021, and we haven't even seen a screenshot yet. It might still be years away. Bethesda announced Elder Scrolls 6 in 2018. Bethesda now says they won't even talk about it until after Starfield comes out, which, by the way, they just said will be November 2022. Elden Ring was announced in 2019, and should make it out in early 2022. And anyone remember Bayonetta 3? It was announced in 2017, and we haven't seen a shred of it yet, and its developer really loves when you ask about it. E3 2021 is a particularly special case since it was an entirely virtual event. You see, we're just getting over this whole pandemic thing that sort of consumed the world, for all of 2020 and a good portion of 2021. So there are a fair amount of mulligans to be handed out for delays for games and hardware, and that's fine, I appreciate and understand that, and have your mulligans. But what it doesn't explain away are games that were announced and perhaps even had a bit of them shown as much as 3 or 4 years ago, and they're still going to be more than 3 or 4 years away, which is completely ridiculous. So what I'm going to do in today's video is look at all the press conferences and major events from E3 2021 and evaluate them using my patented review system of meh, and Unfortunately, the one review score I won't be handing out this year is the coveted review score of wow! Another thing I won't be doing is picking a winner of E3, because that's kinda dumb. Now, I don't want to insult anybody doing their own videos who is picking a winner, or even any of the media outlets doing that, because picking a winner of E3 has been a very common thing to do for as long as there's been E3. But the thing is, whoever wins E3 is really irrelevant, because it hasn't had any lasting effect on any company if they've had either a great or a terrible performance. Sega had some great performances, and look, they still had to jump out of the hardware business. Now, all the major players in the game console business, which at this point are Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft, have all had terrible E3s, and they've all had great E3s. And there's practically never any consequences. One might argue that the E3 for the Xbox One and PlayStation 4, where Sony kind of ate Microsoft's lunch, might have contributed to the failure of the Xbox One to catch on as quickly as the 360 did. But I think that was largely due to other factors, not the E3 performance itself. Now, you know who the winner is if a company has a really great E3? Us, the gamers. We're the winners. That may sound a little bit corny, but I also feel that it's the truth. Alright, on with the evaluations. Microsoft's show was pretty Microsofty. It was long, I'll give it that, clocking in at around 90 minutes. It was mainly filled with games we'd already heard of. They led with Starfield, a game that we now know is at least a year and a half away, and it was still not much more than a teaser. Later on, they showed some Halo Infinite, which might make it out in time for the holidays this year. Infinite was basically delayed a while back for looking too much like a last-gen game. And this year, well, it still doesn't exactly exude next-gen-ness. Of the other really big notable games, Elden Ring is early next year, another Forza Horizon is coming this November, and Flight Simulator is coming to Xbox consoles. Yippee, I guess? Aside from the games that we already knew were coming, they showed off a few other things, and yeah, none of it was really all that compelling, and did I mention this thing was 90 minutes long? Oh my god! The Microsoft video was also missing some games that people were kind of expecting, like Avowed and Everwild. And really, the whole Microsoft Edge is kind of blunted in my opinion, since all of its biggest games will also be on PC. I get that a lot of people were tied into the Xbox ecosystem with loads of purchases and services, but you already have those people, Microsoft. What was there to really bring in anybody new? Buying every game studio on Earth hasn't seemed to help your game problems either. Microsoft's presentation definitely ranks meh. Next, let's talk about Sony's E3 presentation. Sony didn't do an E3 presentation this year, and yet somehow they still had a better show than Microsoft. I give Sony's non-existent event the rating of, huh? Then we move on to Nintendo, the company that can make grown men cry with a video of a semi-realistic looking little teenage elf boy. Nintendo E3s are like, well,
a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get.
Sometimes they blow people away, and sometimes they just blow. People were expecting new Switch hardware, a long look at Breath of the Wild 2, something on Metroid Prime 4, and maybe something new with the Xenoblade series or various other announcements around big Nintendo properties. What did Nintendo deliver? Basically none of that. Sure, we got a short glimpse at Breath of the Wild 2, but it's now targeting 2022, and you know what that means. It's probably coming out in 2023 at the earliest. Nintendo showed a whole bunch of remakes and collections. Not exactly compelling stuff. I mean, I like Advance Wars as much as the next guy, but not enough to buy it again on Switch just because of, hey, look, polygons. Mario Party Superstars? Sure, I bet it's fun, and again, not something I consider a huge deal. Obviously, the biggest game announcement from Nintendo was Metroid Dread. It's another 2.5D Metroid game from the team that brought us the excellent Samus Returns on 3DS. Yeah, that's great, and I'll definitely buy it on day one. But I will note from the Treehouse videos that follow the Direct, it seemed to have a lot of frame rate issues, and I doubt these will be fixed before launch because, well, Link's Awakening had similar frame rate issues when it was shown at its E3 event, and guess what? They were still there when we got the retail release, and are still there to this day. Anyway, I'll point out now that Nintendo's experience doing Directs really helped them put on an engaging presentation if nothing else. They didn't dwell too long on any games, and even the stuff that didn't interest me personally came and went quickly thanks to the Direct's breezy, snappy pace. When it comes to presentation format and pacing, Nintendo absolutely crushed everyone else and is the model of how to do this kind of thing right. So how'd Nintendo do overall? Well, they definitely didn't knock it out of the park, but also had the best presentation of the event by far. That's not saying much for this year's E3, but they earn a solid, Hey, Intellivision had an event this year. The format wasn't super great, with Tommy Tallarico basically just talking to us the entire thing, with some CG renders of the system, pictures, and video cutting in every now and then. He discussed a bunch of stuff about the controller and system that had already been discussed before and that we pretty much already knew. A pretty cool reveal was that if you use your own Amico controller on another Amico system, that particular system will have access to all your games as long as you're there with your controller. Hey, that's pretty nice, right? Intellivision showed off quick clips of Amico games that we mostly had already seen, but managed to squeeze in a few things we hadn't. Or more to the point, they slipped in a few seconds worth of things we hadn't seen. The biggest game was unquestionably a spiritual successor to Echo the Dolphin called Dolphin Quest. I'd like to have seen just a little bit more on that game, but even so, it's probably still now the Amico game that I would personally be the most interested in. You know what Tommy and Intellivision didn't confirm during the presentation? The release date and price of the Amico. Sure, they announced this before, but come on, it would have been nice to have some confirmation since this system is supposed to launch in under 4 months at this point. Regarding the presentation itself, this should have been the Amico's big moment. They could have shown off the packaging, confirmed the release date and price, shown off a bunch of games we hadn't seen before, and stuff like that. It should have been glitzy and quick and shown us why we want the system. But instead of that, we got what should have really just been a YouTube video update from their channel that firmly falls into the category of meh. And I'll add that I'm only talking about the E3 presentation, not the system itself, so relax, Amico fans and haters. Expectations were high for Square Enix, the publishers of Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest. Would we see more of Final Fantasy XVI? More of the recently announced Dragon Quest games from just a few weeks ago? Maybe even a teaser for Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2? The answer to all of those questions was, no, of course not. Can I introduce you to Square Enix? They began their event with the introduction of, and a way too long look at, Guardians of the Galaxy. I mean, the game looks good and fun, and I'm really interested in it. But the almost 20 minutes of uninterrupted gameplay really dragged on. After that, they announced a slate of 2D remakes of the old Final Fantasy games. That's right, if you don't have enough versions of Final Fantasies 1 through 6 already, well, good news. You get to buy them all over again with a slightly different art style. Yeah, these are supposed to look more true to the originals, but they're not going to be exactly the same. And I've played those games a million times and own multiple copies on multiple machines, and I'm not buying them again. Well, maybe just a few. Okay, I'll take them all, you monsters! After showing a few more games that I would describe as inconsequential, Square Enix debuted the too-long trailer of Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin. This is Team Ninja's more action-y take on the Final Fantasy franchise, and serves as sort of a parallel story to the very first Final Fantasy. And I'm not entirely sure, but I think maybe, just maybe, protagonist Jack might want to kill Chaos.
I'm here to kill Chaos. Looks like Chaos has been waiting for us. I want to kill Chaos. This is the Shrine of Chaos. Chaos. We're here to kill Chaos.
Oh yeah, this game looked pretty weird. But Square Enix's overall presentation, it was really pretty weak and earns the rating of ugh. And hey, here's Ubisoft. Ubisoft's presentation was really more of a traditional E3 event when it comes to format. It kicked off with a way too long re-announcement of Rainbow Six Extraction. Then it went into, hey, we're gonna sell you some music for Rocksmith. Then there was a commercial for stuff on Apple TV. After that, some more Far Cry 6, which of course has been shown many times before. The big things revealed at this event included a new Mario plus Rabbids game, and a new game based on James Cameron's Avatar movies. Well, you know, movie technically, since as of right now there's still only one. You know what, let's just say it's based on the Avatar franchise. Anyway, I hope that Mario plus Rabbids Sparks of Hope will be decent. I really couldn't give less of a about anything having to do with Avatar though. Maybe the game will be good, but the movie was bad. That's right, I said it, deal with it. When it comes to the presentation itself here, Ubisoft's presentation walks away with a definite meh. This was the first E3 where Capcom did their very own full-blown presentation. And it showed. Hey Capcom, paint drying called and wants its status as the most boring thing in the world to watch back. There were no big moments during Capcom's event. They just showed off a bunch of DLC and already announced sequels and remakes for the most part. They also leaned in at the end with info about esports tournaments for the now pretty old ad delivery system known as Street Fighter V. Yay. Now sure, Capcom's games are reliably pretty good, and it looks like their newer stuff will continue that long-standing trend. Still, E3 is supposed to be that once-a-year spectacle where you really knock everyone's socks off, and man, did they blow it with a dull presentation that, despite being relatively short, felt like it dragged on for hours. I'm sure the 2 new games they showed will be just fine, but the presentation itself? Ugh. People initially thought Take-Two was going to do a normal E3 event. Would we see the eagerly anticipated GTA 6? Maybe something new on Borderlands? Nope, instead Take-Two thought E3 was the perfect venue to put on a panel about inclusion and diversity. Are those things important? Yeah, sure. Does this kind of thing fit into an event like E3 that's supposed to be about game reveals and gaming hardware? No. I won't rate this one, but hey Take-Two, this is just the kind of thing that GDC is for. People got all excited when they saw Namco Bandai was doing a presentation. OMG, they have so much to show. Tales of Arise, Elden Ring, Scarlet Nexus, House of Ashes, and those were just the games that we already knew about. What else might they be announcing? Eagle-eyed observers will have noticed that the E3 schedule showed that it was a House of Ashes presentation, and all we got was like a 5-minute developer interview on that game and nothing else. Even if you knew in advance it was only about House of Ashes, that presentation was pure... Mercifully, EA decided to skip E3 2021, and will instead do their own event on July 22nd this year. Because they skipped this year's event, they managed to tie Sony's rating of... Huh? So E3 2021 was filled with an awful lot of and meh, which is really pretty typical of E3 for the last 20 or so years. Now the one key thing I think we can all take away from this year's E3 is that none of these giant multi-million-dollar companies are really any good at producing quick, snappy, effective videos to communicate to us about their new products. The one exception to this rule was really Nintendo. And I'm not saying that their presentation was showing a lot of great things content-wise, but they produced the most effective video that communicated things in the most clear and direct way, and they didn't dwell on any game in particular for too long. It was snappy, it was breezy, and it should be the model for how anybody else conducts an E3 presentation that's video only from now on. So that'll do it for this video, my current and retro gaming friends. If you enjoyed the video, please like and share it. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel for more primarily retro gaming goodness. So tell me, what did you think of E3 2021? Was there any press conference or really video event that you thought was particularly good? Anything that got you really hyped up or excited? I'd love to hear your opinions in the comments. With that, I'll say thanks for watching, and see me later.